Hey folks, Eric Stackelbeck here. Welcome to the Watchman Newscast live stream. Back in the United States after a great week-long production in Israel. I've got a lot to share about my time on the ground in Israel. Again, I just got back a little over 24 hours ago, and it was an incredible trip once again. I have to say, we got a lot of great material for the Watchman Newscast, for the Watchman TV show, a very, very fruitful trip. So I'm looking forward to sharing that with you. We've got a lot to talk about. Very, very busy day, news day in the Middle East. Number one, new details emerging about this Israeli strike that we told you about. It happened over the weekend while I was in Israel. Israeli strike against Iranian targets inside Syria. And these were, folks, apparently high-value Iranian targets. Again, more coming on that in a few minutes. We'll break that down and the significance, broader significance of it, and the timing, why that's significant as well. Also, we've got major anti-terror raids today taking place in the city of Nablus in the West Bank. The world calls it the West Bank. Here on the Watchman, we call it Judea and Samaria because that's what the Bible calls it. That is the biblical heartland. Well, major anti-terror raids there today. Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad are none too happy. They're vowing revenge. Could we see another outbreak coming out of Gaza, rockets, etc.? Israel is preparing. We're going to talk about that and the world's reaction to these Israeli anti-terror raids. Very interesting, not surprising, but maddening to say the least. We'll break that down as well. Also, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu really getting serious now. He's always been serious, but having increasingly serious conversations with his defense officials and his team about a potential strike against Iran's nuclear facilities. Folks, we've been telling you here in the newscast that the ascension back into the prime minister's chair by Benjamin Netanyahu could really speed things up vis-a-vis that Iranian nuclear threat and Israel dealing with that Iranian nuclear threat. So we're going to break that down as well. Russia also making some noise for sure, launching apparently, or conducting apparently, an ICBM test, intercontinental ballistic missile test. Now, there are reports it was an unsuccessful test, but certainly Russia has plenty of ICBM know-how and technology. Whether this test was successful or not, as Russia and China also are coming more publicly closer together. So we've got a lot to discuss. Before I do that, I just want to welcome everyone. We will have thousands with us by the time we are done today on this live stream. Again, we are going to 5 p.m. Eastern time. We're going a solid hour here on the live stream. So be sure to send along your questions for our Q&A session. The last 15 to 18 minutes or so, we will be taking your questions. So send along some good ones. Ask me what I saw in Israel. I saw a lot, and it was good as always. It never gets old, as I mentioned. But we've got people from all over the world here right now, I'm seeing, commenting. So this is great. Welcome, everyone. Hey, if you are with us, I assume that you are a regular Watchman viewer. If not, be sure to subscribe. Click the notification bell. Give us a thumbs up as well so you never miss a video. If you missed yesterday's newscast, by the way, and again, if you're a subscriber, you shouldn't have. You should have got the alert. But we had our good friend Amir Sarfati of Behold Israel with us yesterday for a wide-ranging interview that I conducted with Amir on the shores of the Sea of Galilee a few days ago. Very beautiful backdrop at nighttime on the Sea of Galilee. Can't beat that. And great analysis and commentary from Amir, a breakdown of all the latest information, latest news occurring in the region and how it affects you no matter where you live. And also a bit of Amir's personal testimony, how he became a follower of Jesus. Great stuff. So if you missed it, you can check that out in our archives. That was yesterday, February 21st, under Newscast. Let's get into it now. I mentioned that new details are emerging about that Israeli strike over the weekend in Syria. Now, folks, we broke this down on Monday's newscast, but just to refresh your memory and give you a little bit of a backdrop before we dig into it, Israeli fighter jets reportedly struck a neighborhood right on the outskirts of the Syrian capital of Damascus on Saturday night. I believe that was February 18th. And the targets, we were hearing rumblings that it was some kind of Iranian target. The neighborhood is called Kfar Sousa, this neighborhood in Damascus. And the target was an Iranian school. Now, what an Iranian school means when it is inside Syria, needless to say, folks, it ain't reading, writing, and arithmetic being taught at the so-called Iranian school. So we wondered, okay, what was the target? We were waiting for some more details to emerge about that. And here is what we have today. These reports from Middle Eastern media. A rocket attack in Damascus that Syria blamed on Israel, I'm quoting directly here, hit an installation where Iranian officials were meeting to advance programs to develop drone or missile capabilities for Iran's allies in Syria. Surprise, surprise. This is a Reuters report. It goes on to say, a source close to the Syrian government with knowledge of Sunday's strike, so it was early Sunday morning, our time here in the States, said it hit a gathering of Syrian and Iranian technical experts in drone manufacturing, though no top-level Iranian was killed, and Syria fired back. Syrian anti-aircraft fire may have killed a few civilians as well. So what you had was most likely members of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, the Quds Force, in Syria, meeting with officials from the government of Bashar al-Assad or military officials from Assad's army, and they're talking about, hey, how can we ramp up drone and missile production inside Syria? Folks, this tells us a few things. Number one, no matter how much Israel strikes Iran inside Syria, and remember, over the past decade plus, Israel has carried out hundreds, at least, of airstrikes against Iranian and Hezbollah targets inside Syria. No matter how much Israel does that, and they've done it relentlessly and successfully, they've really, really hurt Iran inside Syria and made a dent in Iran's capabilities in that country at Israel's doorstep, by the way. And yet, no matter how much they've done it, Iran is absolutely determined to transform Syria into another version of what they've been able to accomplish in Lebanon, a forward base, a terror enclave from which they can attack Israel. Now, I mentioned the Lebanon model. Remember, in southern Lebanon, Iran's most lethal proxy, Hezbollah, wields some 150,000 rockets and missiles pointed at every inch of Israel. Many of these missiles and rockets are perched on the Lebanon-Israel border. Iran wants to duplicate that in Syria. Folks, this is not brain surgery. It's pretty simple to see. Number one, they want to do that. They want to turn Syria into a forward base. Number two, they want to use Syria as a transit point to ship weapons and weapons parts, advanced weapons like precision-guided missiles, PGMs, through Syria into the hands of Hezbollah, in southern Lebanon. This is real simple. And this is key to Iran's strategic and ideological goal to wipe the state of Israel off the map. That's what they want to do. And that is why they are trying to surround Israel on all sides and doing a pretty good job of it. I call it the ring of fire that surrounds Israel, whether it's Syria, whether it's Lebanon with Hezbollah, Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Gaza, more on them in a minute, the Houthis to the far south, in Yemen. Iran is hell-bent, I guess the key word there would be hell-bent on turning Syria into a forward base. And the reason they are all in, and man, Iran has lost members of the Revolutionary Guards Corps over the years. They've taken some blows in Syria, not only during that Syrian civil war where they were fighting alongside the Assad regime and Hezbollah, but also clearly at the hands of Israel and what Israel's done to them in Syria. You would think Iran might back off and get out of Syria. Say, you know what? We've incurred heavy losses. It ain't worth it. We're taking heavy blows here. We're out of here. But folks, they're not doing that. They continue to try to increase their efforts in Syria, whether it's drones, whether it's missiles, perhaps even chemical weapons. There's chemical factories inside Syria the Assad regime is involved with. We've reported that here in the newscast. And time after time, Israel targets these factories, these weapons production factories, time after time, weapons convoys. Israel constantly, you watch the newscast, right? We're constantly reporting on Israeli strikes. And yet, Iran relentlessly attempts to turn Syria again into that forward base. So clearly, Syria is indispensable to Iran's plans, its strategic and ideological plans. Why do you think that it was Iran, in particular, the not so dearly departed terror master Qasem Soleimani, who went to Moscow twice in 2015 when Bashar al-Assad's regime was on the ropes? Even with Iran and Hezbollah help, they were struggling in that civil war. Soleimani goes to Moscow and personally implores Vladimir Putin to get involved. And before you know it, September 2015, at the invitation of the Iranian regime and presumably the Assad regime, thousands of Russian soldiers were entering Syria. And guess what? They have never left. They're still there today. That's how important it was to Iran to retain Syria, to the point where they begged Russia to get involved. Russia did get involved. They turned the tide of that Syrian civil war in Assad's favor, and the rest is history. Iran has not left. Russia has not left. But if you cut Syria off, how does Iran reach Lebanon? How does Iran reach Hezbollah? If Syria suddenly became hostile territory to Iran, where Iran was not welcome, there was a new regime there that was anti-Iran, how would Iran circumnavigate Syria to get to Lebanon? They could do it, but folks, it would be a lot harder. By sea, perhaps, trying to smuggle weapons in by sea, it would be a lot harder. Clearly, it is much easier to transport weapons to Hezbollah over land and right through Syria. Syria is an indispensable transit point for Iran. Not to mention, Syria is also an indispensable node in that ring of fire for Iran. You've got Israel essentially completely surrounded. To all of a sudden not have an Iran-friendly regime in Syria would hurt that strategic goal and strategic plan. So that is why Iran continues its efforts in Syria, even though Israel is kicking their tails there, folks. Time and time again, Israel has struck Iran and struck them hard. And by the way, this doctrine, it's called the war between wars. That's what Israeli officials and defense officials call it. That doctrine really began under Benjamin Netanyahu in around 2012. The Syrian civil war broke out March 2011. Automatically, Iran was there taking advantage, and Bibi saw, hey, wait a minute, this is not good. Iran is taking advantage of the hellacious civil war in Syria to establish a beachhead at our doorstep from which they can attack us. So he began this policy of striking Iran hard in Syria, drawing clear red lines that Israel will not allow Iran to cross. By the way, we reported on the newscast last week that Iran now is reportedly using Syria under the guise of humanitarian relief. And I talked about this with our friend Amir Sarfati of Behold Israel on yesterday's newscast. Again, check that out. Iranian cargo planes are arriving in Syria, not with earthquake relief. Remember, Turkey was hardest hit, but northwestern Syria also very, very hard hit by that earthquake, that recent earthquake, 7.8 magnitude. But Iran, those cargo planes are carrying weapons and weapons parts. Are you shocked, folks? Are you just surprised? Iran would never do that. The Iranian regime, they would never do that. Huh. Or would they? That's exactly what they're doing. They use tragedy and chaos to advance their aims. the mullahs in Tehran. Think about it. Clearly Syria, madness, over 500,000 people killed, now a massive earthquake. They've used that to their benefit, to further their goals. So that's number one. And number two, think about Yemen, the chaos there over the civil war, the Houthis, and all the rest. Iran has used that to set up shop. Number three, Gaza, chaos, Hamas, Islamic Jihad. Iran has used the chaos there. Iraq, of course. Iran has used the chaos there. Wherever the Iranian regime's foot soldiers are, it's in the midst of chaos, and they only make the chaos worse. The head of the snake resides in Tehran. The fount of evil in that region resides in Tehran, not the Iranian people, who are the main and primary victims of the wickedness of the Iranian regime, not the Iranian people. The Iranian regime, they are the perpetrators, and they use chaos to their own ends. And they've done it quite effectively in Syria, and Israel regularly, as again, we report this on a frequent basis on the newscast, Israel is forced to push them back. Now, the strike I'm describing that occurred over the weekend on the outskirts of Damascus, again, we're getting more details. Apparently, none of those Iranian officials were killed, but Israel clearly sent a message, but Iran's still going to continue to push. So it's going to be back and forth, tit for tat. Now, this Israeli strike came on the heels of a reported Iranian, not reported, it was an Iranian drone attack against an Israeli-owned, I believe it was an oil tanker, in the Persian Gulf. I called it a cargo ship the other day. I think it was a tanker in the Persian Gulf. Iranian suicide drones. Some people hate that term, kamikaze drones, however you want to call it, folks. These were unmanned aerial vehicles carrying explosives that were flown into an Israeli-owned ship, a ship owned by an Israeli businessman. No one was killed, thankfully, but there was damage to the ship. So the tit for tat. We used to call it a shadow war, folks. This has long been out of the shadows, clearly. Will Iran react to this very bold strike over the weekend in Damascus? We shall see, but the plot thickens and the beat goes on. And again, don't expect Iran to empty out of Syria anytime soon. And for that matter, don't expect Russia to empty out of Syria anytime soon. Okay, let's move on to our next topic. Along those lines, just a quick one here. I want to update you on the fact that Russia apparently carried out an ICBM test. I mentioned that at the top. I'm just going to pull up from this article and quote from it. Here you go from the New York Post. A Russian ICBM test failed while Biden was in Ukraine. While Biden was in Ukraine on Monday, Russia tested an intercontinental ballistic missile that appears to have failed, according to a report. U.S. officials said that Russia used a deconfliction line, wherever we heard that term again, deconfliction between Russia and Israel over Syria, right? A deconfliction line to notify the U.S. in advance of the missile test, which reportedly did not pose a risk. The U.S. did not view the test as an anomaly or an escalation. Okay, but clearly the timing was no coincidence when Biden is in Ukraine. So just something to keep an eye on there, folks. I don't think, and I've said this before, I don't think that Europe and Biden take Russia seriously. I don't believe that Russia is bluffing. When Russia talks about war with the West and going to a nuclear option, I'm not saying, what I mean by nuclear option, tactical battlefield nukes in Ukraine. I don't think any of this is a bluff or bluster. I think in today's world, especially in that area of the world, expect the unexpected. With everything going on right now in that Russia-Ukraine theater, in the Middle East, of course, expect, even China, Taiwan, expect the unexpected, because all of them smell weakness in Washington, D.C. That is the overriding reason that they are becoming more bold. Biden goes to Ukraine, Russia launches an ICBM, a test, but nonetheless, the timing is not a coincidence. Weakness in Washington has emboldened rogue regimes, and they're coming together. whether it's Russia and Iran, whether it's Russia and China. Folks, I've called this the Gathering Storm Coalition: Russia, Iran, China, and North Korea, and their various allies like Venezuela, Belarus, Hezbollah, loop them in, at least aligned with Russia and Iran. So it's a dangerous time. God Almighty still sits on the throne. Thank God. Whew. But it is certainly a dangerous time, no doubt. And there is, someone just wrote here in the comments, a global B-Dog writes in the comments here. I'm just looking at our chat on the side of the screen. There is a global power vacuum. Yes, indeed, there is. And that is when evil men get very bold and get very ambitious and start to push and take an inch, then they take a mile, they see what they can get away with, and they push and they push and they push. And that's what's happening right now. I want to tell you a bit about my Israel trip real quick. We have to talk more about this anti-terror raid today, by the way, and how the world is reacting. We have people from all over the world watching right now, thousands with us. Welcome, welcome, everyone. It is great to see you all. And it's great to be back from Israel. Although, Israel is my second home. Jerusalem is my second home. It's always tough to leave. I want to come home to my family, and it's even tougher to leave my family, trust me. So I love coming home to my family. But Israel is clearly near and dear to my heart. And just give you an idea real quick before we move on to the next story of what I did while I was in Israel. Number one, we hooked up with our good buddy. This is just a little sneak peek, a preview of what you can expect on the Watchman here in the newscast and the TV show in the coming months. Danny the Digger Herman, our good friend, I joined him at the Tower of David in the heart of Jerusalem, a place with incredible history going back 3,000 years. You will not the city of David. This is the Tower of David. It's not far from the city of David. It's an ancient, iconic site in Jerusalem. You'll know it when you see it. When you look at the Jerusalem skyline, you'll know it when you see it. I'll say that. I did a great show there with Danny. Also, we dug into a very interesting period of history. Now, we obviously focus a lot on the first and second temple period of your Bible, the Old and New Testament periods. We dug into the Crusader period in Israel. Yes, there was a time when European knights ruled over the Holy Land. You know about the Crusades, you've heard about it, but we dig into it pretty deep here. We go to the remains of an ancient castle in Israel. And folks, I call this the hidden history of Israel, that period, after the temple fell, after the Bar Kokhba revolt in the 2nd century AD, up until the modern rebirth of Israel. A lot of that history, people don't know much about it. The medieval period in Israel is absolutely fascinating. The Crusader period, they were fighting Muslim armies led by Saladin. He was the main Muslim leader, one of the main Muslim leaders during that period that the Crusaders were there. But there are the remains of many ancient castles littered throughout Israel, Crusader castles built by European Crusader knights from France, Germany, Great Britain. Folks, it's an absolutely fascinating period of history. So we go to two very important sites where two of the pivotal battles of the Crusades took place. You're going to love this. I loved it as a history buff. And it's something fresh and new, a period of history we haven't necessarily hit on the show before. So you're really going to like that, I believe. And where else did we go with Danny? We got around with Danny the Digger Herman. We were in Galilee as well. Of course, with Amir, the content with Amir in the Galilee that you can check out on yesterday's newscast. And then some great interviews, including with Eli Cohen, the foreign minister of Israel. Now, Eli Cohen just returned. You probably saw the headlines, folks. A few days ago, he was in Ukraine meeting with Zelensky, the Ukrainian president. He was the only Israeli official to visit Ukraine since the war broke out 1 year ago. And he's the highest ranking Middle Eastern official to visit Ukraine since the war broke out. Now, you'll see the interview either tomorrow or Friday here in the newscast. And the foreign minister, he's one of the highest ranking officials in the Israeli government. We interviewed him at Israel's Knesset. So it was very big to get Eli Cohen. But you make the call, because Israel clearly, whether it's Eli Cohen's visit and Israel reopened its embassy in Kyiv, whether it's two Likud members, or at least one Likud member, Yuli Edelstein, and another Israeli official visiting Ukraine yesterday, calling for more aid to Ukraine. You make the call. Is this smart for Israel to do? Because you know Russia's going to have a response. And if it's all about Syria, the reason Israel has kind of walked that fine line and not gone all in behind Ukraine is because Israel has not wanted to anger Russia. It doesn't want the skies over Russia to be closed, as we discussed at the beginning of this newscast, to Israeli airstrikes against Iran and Hezbollah. Israel's main goal is to push back Iran and Hezbollah inside Syria. And if Russia, which is also in Syria and aligned with Iran and Hezbollah, suddenly says, no more Israel, that's it, then we've got a real problem on our hands, or Israel has a real problem on its hands. So Israel has largely withheld any major support for Ukraine. Now there are signs that may be changing. I even saw a report last night that maybe there's rumblings. Would Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, meet with Zelensky? I know people have strong feelings on that. Would love to hear your comments and also in the question section. But I'd say one thing there. I think if Israel is drawing closer to Ukraine, this is part of the geopolitical chess pieces. It's a response by Israel, folks, to Russia drawing closer to Iran and to Syria, the Assad regime. Russia has been very out in the open about this growing and strong military alliance with the Iranian regime. Israel's not happy about that because Iran is devoted to the destruction of Israel. Israel's saying to Russia, hey, wait a minute. On one hand, you're saying you're our friends and we have a good relationship. On the other hand, you're in bed with our greatest enemies. I've said it before, I'll say it again. You can tell a lot about a man or a nation by the company they keep. And the company Vladimir Putin's regime keeps is China, North Korea. But in the case of Israel, Iran, Hezbollah, and the Assad regime. And oh yeah, a Hamas delegation visited Moscow a few months ago. So Russia is shoulder to shoulder, arm in arm, increasingly so, with Israel's greatest enemies. So Israel's saying, okay, two can play that game. Maybe we'll get a little closer to Ukraine, your mortal enemy, Russia. So look, I can see the thinking here of Israel. Israel's playing the game too and saying, wait a minute, we're not going to just let you. Russia, you say you're our friend, and we've had I wouldn't say a warm relationship, but a good relationship over the past 30 years or so. Obviously, there's at least 1 million Russians living in Israel right now, Russian-speaking natives who've made Aliyah, they've immigrated to Israel. So there's strong ties there. And Israel's saying, okay, if we have a good relationship, then why are you blatantly in our face signing deal after deal with Iran and becoming a close strategic partner with the Iranian regime? Iran wants to destroy us. And Russia, you can't be neutral on that. You're not neutral. You've taken a side, and it seems you're taking Iran's side increasingly. So Israel's saying, you know what? We've tried to be neutral on the Ukraine issue and not anger you. But you know what? You're not returning the favor when it comes to Iran and Hezbollah and all the rest. So two can play that game. That is likely the thinking in Jerusalem right now. What do you think of that? Does it make sense? Does it not make sense? Here's the bottom line. Excuse me. I think it's leading to a collision course between Israel and Russia. At first, it will be a diplomatic collision course. And folks, look, the relationship has been unraveling for the past year. We've documented that in the newscast. Even this airstrike that Israel conducted over the weekend against Iran and Syria, right away, the Russian Foreign Ministry condemned it. You see the tension rising. Russia's only going to come closer to Iran. They need each other, Iran and Russia. They're both sanctioned heavily, isolated on the world stage. They need each other. China, they all need each other. North Korea, the Gathering Storm Coalition, they need each other. So expect Russia more and more to move away from Israel. And oh yeah, the Bible talks about it. That's the main litmus test for what's going to happen, the book of Ezekiel. Chapters 38 and 39, the war of Gog and Magog. Funny name, I know, but it's a name you need to know, and a conflict you need to know about, a conflict yet to come. I believe that Russia will lead a coalition of nations against Israel. That coalition will include Iran. It will include Turkey. The good news is that coalition doesn't get very far. The Bible is very clear that God intervenes and shows his face to the world in a very public, powerful way, and that coalition falls, meets its demise on the mountains of Israel. But make no mistake about it, folks. What we see now are the chess pieces moving, and the seeds are being laid here for that coming war. And, you look at Turkey right now and you say, well, wait a minute. Eli Cohen, who I just interviewed, the foreign minister of Israel, yes, he visited Ukraine. He also visited Turkey in the aftermath of the earthquake, which was horrific, of course, at least 44,000 people dead. We're praying for everyone in Turkey and Syria who was, affected by that earthquake. My good friend, Chris Mitchell, who is the Jerusalem bureau chief for CBN News, he just got back, folks, and he said, Eric, look, and I interviewed him about it as well. You'll see that in the newscast coming up in the coming days. He was on the ground in the epicenter of the quake. He said, Eric, the scenes were apocalyptic, his word. So there's major struggles in Turkey right now. Unfortunately, the Turkish leader, Recep Erdogan, has been a thorn in the side of Israel and the West for years. He is, in recent months, though, turning a new leaf, at least publicly. I don't think his heart has turned a new leaf, but he's putting on this public veneer. He met with Eli Cohen, the Israeli foreign minister, and he is drawing back to Israel. After years of slamming Israel, calling it a terrorist state and all the rest, he's making nice, because even before the earthquake, the Turkish economy was a shambles. Inflation is through the roof. He's got an election coming in May, which may very well get canceled in the wake of this earthquake. In the very least, it will be postponed. But Turkey's making nice right now under Erdogan, but he's a man who I believe cannot be trusted if you're Israel, and they need to be very wary in approaching him. So that's why you might say, well, maybe he's not part of that coalition. Maybe Erdogan is not the leader who is at the helm in Turkey when that coalition comes. Maybe Vladimir Putin's not at the helm in Russia when this war of Gog and Magog comes, but I think the nations are pretty clearly defined by the prophet Ezekiel. But we all have different interpretations, and you might say, no. Russia's not even involved in that. Turkey leads that invasion force. Hey, it's good to debate it. It's not a salvation issue. That's a key thing. Sometimes as believers, we get so mixed up in things that we tell people, if you don't agree with us on a certain issue, like a prophetic issue, you're going to hell. No. You believe Jesus is your Lord and Savior. You've accepted him into your heart. You're walking the walk. You're living out your faith. You've accepted Jesus. Okay. We might disagree on a few things. We agree on the core things. We might disagree on the timing of Gog Magog or the members of the Gog Magog coalition force. Fair enough. That's not a salvation issue. I know we get very heated in these debates, but just remind yourself, you're debating a brother or sister in Christ. We're on the same team. We can disagree on certain things like that don't affect our salvation, okay? Just a reminder, because I know the comments always rev up, which is great. I like an active discussion, but be respectful, and to your fellow brothers and sisters in Christ. I think that's very important as we, as ambassadors for Christ, are in front of the eyes of the world. I know I am, with what I do, and you're in front of the eyes no matter what you do. You may have an audience. Ultimately, we have an audience of one, the Lord Jesus, but you may have 10 people in your vicinity. Man, you need to, as someone who is a committed follower of Jesus, you need to live out your faith in front of these folks. And you can't resort to the name calling and the anger and all that kind of stuff. You got to be able to debate, but debate respectfully and in love, and be firm, and don't compromise, but don't stoop down to that level, the level of the world, if you're a believer. So very important. But a great trip to Israel, no doubt. And I see the train a-coming, two trains colliding, Russia and Israel, certainly. And if Netanyahu visits Ukraine, wow, you will see Russia go all in. It's already really all in on the Iran support. And that may get to the stage, folks. Israel is so concerned about losing freedom of movement, freedom to operate in Syria. What if Russia decides one day, at the urging of Iran, to close off the skies above Syria? And Russia says to Israel, sorry, guys, no more. That's enough. You're no longer permitted to operate in Syria. And that gives Iran a field day. Iran says, yes, now we won't be beaten back, and we can establish that beachhead, and this is great. Israel's not going to take that lying down. Do you really think Israel's going to say, okay, Russia, we won't strike anymore? Okay. No. Israel will find other ways to do it under the noses, by the way, of Russian troops in Syria. Folks, fasten your seatbelts and watch that dynamic as 2023 moves on. That is really brewing. And speaking of things that are brewing in 2023, and not necessarily maybe this year, but in soon to come years, Benjamin Netanyahu, I'm going to read directly here from the Times of Israel what he is saying about Iran's nuclear program and what he, as the leader of Israel, is prepared to do about it. Let's read. Let me pull it up real quick. Give me a minute. And here we go. From the Times of Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reportedly held a series of secret high-level meetings with top military officials in Israel aimed at upping preparations for a possible confrontation with Iran. According to Israel's Channel 12, Netanyahu huddled 5 times in recent weeks with Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, Israel Defense Forces Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi, Mossad head David Barnea, and Military Intelligence Chief Aharon Haliva to discuss readying for a possible attack on Iran's nuclear program. Very interesting. The report said the result of the meetings that Israel will act alone if the international community does not step in to help has been relayed to U.S. Biden administration officials and French President Emmanuel Macron. Israel is saying, whether you help us or not, we are going to defend the world's one and only Jewish state, and we will do what we need to do to prevent another Holocaust. It's real simple, as they should. Netanyahu on Tuesday night repeated his stance that the international community, the quote-unquote international community, needed to back its promises, good luck, to thwart Iran's nuclear ambitions, turn the threats into military action if needed. You know Biden's not going to do that, and you know Europe isn't going to do that. And then Bibi says, quote, the only thing that has ever stopped rogue nations from developing nuclear weapons is a credible military threat or a credible military action, he told a security conference. A necessary condition, and often a sufficient condition, is credible military action. Credible, key word. Not just Biden saying, we'll never allow Iran to go nuclear. Iran laughs. They know he doesn't mean it. Netanyahu says, and this was the most poignant thing he said, folks, the longer you wait, the harder that becomes, and we have waited very long. You do the math. Read between the lines. These, to me, are final warnings from Benjamin Netanyahu to the world that if you don't get your act together, we're going to do what we need to do to preserve the existence of the state of Israel and the Jewish people. We will not permit another Holocaust. It ain't happening. And if you don't lift a finger, Biden, France, Germany, Britain, UN, then we're going to do what we have to do. We're going to leave all the consequences to God. We're going to let the chips fall where they may. But we will still exist. Folks, what's worse? And we know this will likely lead to a regional war that no one wants to see. Why do you think Israel has waited so long to act against Iran? Israel wants to avoid a regional war, but war is coming. But what's worse? If you're Israel, strike Iran's nuclear facilities. We know there's blowback. That ring of fire that surrounds Israel will be activated. We know that Iran will also likely fire ballistic missiles from Iran, from Iranian soil. The ring of fire is activated. Hezbollah, there's the Great Northern War, quite possibly, that we've talked about often here in the newscast. People will die. Israelis will die. Israeli civilians will die. God forbid, I pray it wasn't the case. Civilians in many countries. Folks, it's too ugly and nasty to even contemplate. But it's heading there. But what is worse, as bad, as horrible, as horrific as that is, no one wants to see it. What's worse? That, which is, look, there's a war, perhaps a limited war, not an all-out war, and it's short, brutal, and nasty. But then it ends, and the dust settles, and Iran, look, their nuclear facilities, even if they're set back 5 years, it buys Israel some much-needed breathing room and time, and it sends Iran a message that it needs to receive, Iran's leaders. Not the greatest scenario, but I believe that scenario is better than the alternative. What do you think? I'd like to hear in the comments. Here's the alternative. Iran acquires the bomb. Israel allows that to happen. Iran tests the nuclear weapon, announces to the world, we have reached, we are now a nuclear power. We have a nuclear capability. We've reached our goal. And then the entire region, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt, Turkey says, uh-oh, even the UAE. And they start driving frantically, feverishly for the bomb. And all of a sudden, you have a nuclear arms race in the world's most volatile and chaotic region. That ain't good. Not only that, Iran then announces that it has the capability to mount this warhead on a ballistic missile, even an intercontinental ballistic missile, ICBM for short. For me, as an American, I shudder at that thought. ICBMs do exactly what their name says. They travel across continents and across oceans. We are considered here in the United States the great Satan. Remember, in Iran's ideology, Israel is only the little Satan. So there's that. And then if you're Israel, and to me, this may be the main reason that it's a non-starter for Israel to allow Iran to acquire the bomb. It should be a non-starter for the world. It provides the ring of fire, the terror groups, with an umbrella, a nuclear umbrella. Meaning, the next time Hamas gets a little rocket happy and launches some rockets out of Gaza, or there's a flare up north with Hezbollah, or Syria, there's something launched from Syria, will Israel think twice about responding? Because Iran is sitting there with its arms crossed and saying, go ahead, Zionist entity, do it. And maybe, just maybe, we'll unleash the bomb on Tel Aviv. It provides the ring of fire, an umbrella, a nuclear umbrella. And then fourth, Iran may just, unprovoked, may just one day decide to launch. They want to wipe Israel off the map. Folks, they mean what they say. I've said it before, I'll say it again today. If the 20th century, the century of Mao, Stalin, Saddam, Hitler, Pol Pot, Castro, the North Korean regime, if the 20th century taught us anything, it's that when evil men tell you they want to kill you, you should believe them and take them at their word. The Iranian regime has been very clear and upfront about its goals and its intentions. It's clearly, whether it's Syria, wherever they are, Gaza, Lebanon, they're taking steps to make that a reality. We've read the book. We know it's not going to happen. But nonetheless, they must be stopped. Evil men, all too often in the 20th century, were not stopped. They killed tens of millions, created carnage, havoc, world war. And now it seems to rest upon the shoulders of this one tiny nation the size of the state of New Jersey to stop the Iranian nuclear menace. So I ask, as we get to questions, what's worse? For Israel to strike Iran, and yes, there is a limited regional war and there's blowback, it gets nasty, but when the dust settles, Iran is ultimately weakened. And perhaps in that war, by the way, Israel decisively defeats Hezbollah once and for all, destroys Hezbollah. I think the two go hand in hand, a strike on Iran's nuclear facilities and a strike against Hezbollah, a decisive war with Hezbollah. And Hezbollah's completely weakened. What's worse, that or what I just laid out for you? Nuclear umbrella, the unpredictability of Iran. When will they strike? Will they fire the bomb? Could you imagine living in Israel under that constant shadow of a possible nuclear strike? Can you really trust an apocalyptic regime in Tehran to pull its punches and not use the bomb? It's got the means to destroy Israel at its fingertips if it gets the bomb. Do you really think they're not going to use that? Maybe they won't right away. Maybe it'll be 5 years, 10 years. But eventually, folks, they'll use it because their ideology demands it. The first rule of war, know your enemy. Know the ideology. This is what they believe inside the Iranian regime. They believe a great apocalyptic battle is coming against Israel when they will emerge victorious. I know it's sobering, but I'm just laying it out because I think you watch this channel not for sunshine and lollipops, but because you'd rather know than not know about what's happening in the world right now. But here's the great thing. I can sit here, and if I didn't know Jesus, I'd be hiding under my chair right now saying, oh, what am I going to do? But I know that God Almighty is in control. And I know these things have to happen. I've read the Bible, frontwards, backwards, front to back. And I know this has to happen. And I can still be encouraged and get up every morning with optimism. As everything's crashing down around us, it seems, I can get up with optimism because I know I'm a child of the King, of the Most High God, that I know the Lord Jesus personally, that he will shepherd me along through the storm. He will be a lamp to my feet, a light to my path, and he will make my paths straight. Folks, if you're watching now, I implore you, if you don't know Jesus yet, get to know him. The clock is ticking. We are in unprecedented, perilous times, but these are Bible times, no doubt. So maybe you're watching right now, you heard this, and you say, you know what, that's a wake-up call I needed. I hope so. You might be struggling right now in your faith. You might be down. I'm in the United States. I'm vexed every day by what's going on around me in this country that I love. It's been a blessing from God above. And what the woke radical movement is doing here, it's a spiritual battle, no doubt. It's a real struggle for the soul of this country. And yet, I can wake up every day and say, okay, God, what do you have for me today? How are you going to use me today? What can I do for you today, Lord, for the kingdom? This could be this could be the greatest opportunity we've ever had to bring in a great harvest to the kingdom. One last harvest before the King returns. So take heart and be encouraged and be vigilant in sending me your questions, because I'm going to read some of them right now. And they better be good. I'm just kidding. I'm sure they are. Let's see what we have. Okay, sorry for the shaky laptop here. Let's see. There's always great questions from our elite Watchman audience. What do we have? Pardon me as I'm just looking here. IDN asks, well, I'm glad you asked, IDN, because I didn't have time to get to it. What do you have to say about Israel's recent raid in Nablus? Now, Nablus, I mentioned this at the top, so I'm glad we can chat about it real quick just to fill you guys in on what happened. Nablus was known as Shechem in the Bible. Does that ring a bell? That is where Joseph is buried. Joseph's tomb is in Nablus. Again, biblically known as Shechem. That's the biblical heartland of Judea and Samaria. That's what the Bible calls it. Again, the world, the international community that we mentioned earlier, calls it the West Bank. So Joseph's tomb is there. It's got obviously great biblical significance, but today Nablus has become a hotbed for Palestinian terror groups like Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and this newer group called the Lion's Den. Israel today conducted a major anti-terror raid in that city, and it's not the first. Nablus and Jenin, another West Bank city, over the past several months have been the epicenter of a real clash between Israeli forces and terror groups there. Many anti-terror raids that Israel has conducted. Today, the raid in Nablus apparently led to the deaths of leaders from Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and the Lion's Den. Not the top overall leaders, but top leaders in those groups. At least 10 people killed, over 100 more injured. The Israeli forces entered Nablus today to make 3 arrests. These were anti-terror raids in which they were looking to apprehend 3 suspects who were suspected in being involved in the death of an Israeli soldier back in October. Israel went into Nablus to arrest these 3, get in, get out, take them into custody and get out. Instead, they were surrounded and attacked in Nablus, shot at, an all-out assault against these Israeli forces. So they fought back, and they killed, again, several top-ranking terrorists from these various terror factions in the Palestinian territories, and it got nasty. But Israel said, hey, there has to be law and order. And if people are killing Israelis, terrorists, we are going to apprehend the terrorists. We're going to kill or capture them so they can't kill anyone else. So that's what happened today, and the world is howling about it, including Jordan, and the UAE, who Israel has peace treaties with, and Saudi Arabia, who Israel very much wants to have peace with. And the U.S. is expressing concern about civilian casualties. Now, folks, it's horrific whenever a civilian is killed. We've described this to you on the newscast time and time again, how these Palestinian terror groups intentionally use Palestinian men, women, and children, innocent people, as human shields. So sometimes if you're Israel, you take incredible pains to avoid any civilian casualties. But these terror groups have no regard for human life whatsoever. They have no compunction. They have no hesitation in using a little child or even the mentally disabled. We've seen reports of that as human shields and putting them directly and intentionally in the line of fire. Because you know what? If Israel knows there are civilians there, Israel will not fire. Israeli forces will not fire. We've seen this again and again and again. So keep an eye on that, because Israel right now is warning of retaliation, most likely out of Gaza, rockets, Hamas, Islamic Jihad. They are vowing threats of revenge. They're condemning the raids. And folks, this happens, of course, also in the midst of a terror wave, a mini terror wave that we've reported on here in the newscast in Jerusalem in recent weeks, with Jews slaughtered, which is interesting to me because the U.S., Britain, France, Germany, and Italy got together last week and condemned Israeli settlement building. How dare Jews build houses and communities in Judea and Samaria where Jews lived 3,000 years ago? How dare they do that? Folks, call me crazy. I think Jews, or anyone for that matter, should be able to live wherever they want to live. If they want to build a home in a community and it's perfectly legal and they're not violating any zoning laws, build a house. If you want to move into a neighborhood, you should be able to live there. But the rules appear to be different for Israeli Jews when it comes to the UN and the international community, including the Biden administration. So there's almost an attitude of, and I've seen this in comments from anti-Israel commenters here on the channel, there's almost this attitude of, you know what? Israel had it coming. Yeah, people got killed. Israelis got murdered. But you know what? You shouldn't have built houses in Judea and Samaria. You know what? You shouldn't have conducted a raid against terrorists in Nablus. You had it coming. Isn't that sick? The prophet Isaiah said that, well, I would say, Eric, who's not a prophet, says we live in a world upside down. But Isaiah says, who was a prophet, woe to those who call evil good and good evil. Folks, tell me we aren't living in those days today in 2023. where evil is called good and good is called evil. Bible times. I mentioned a moment ago, Bible times. Let's get to another question. And again, we're looking, God forbid, we're praying against any retaliation in the wake of these raids. What do we have? Come on, keep the questions coming. We got a few minutes left. We're shy today. Our viewers are shy. There's not a whole lot of questions today. A question from Colby Lewis. The last earthquake in Israel was 1927, 96 years ago. Do you think the Gog-Magog war will happen in the next 4 or 5 years? I don't see this world carrying on like it does for another 100 years, says Colby Lewis. Colby, great thoughts, great question. I just talked to Amir Sarfati about this, just to mention again, if you missed that newscast with Amir, great interview yesterday. Check it out in our archives under Newscast, and be sure to subscribe while you're there. Israel is due for a major earthquake, no doubt. It's an area, and Turkey was hit, and we had an earthquake just on Monday in Turkey as well, another quake. It's an area of serious seismic activity. Israel, every 100 years or so, like clockwork, is hit by a pretty major earthquake. I've been in places like Beit Shan, where you can see the effects still. The pillars have fallen from major earthquakes. Israel sits along the Syrian-African rift. Again, all sorts of seismic activity. Iran has a lot of seismic activity as well. Turkey. Israel is due. It's been 96 years, as Colby points out there. So we know earthquakes are coming. The Gog-Magog war will see a major earthquake in Israel. And that earthquake will be part of what this divine onslaught from God himself that destroys those invading armies that come against Israel and that perish on the mountains of Israel. The book of Revelation talks about the greatest earthquake ever seen by humankind at the end. So Israel's bound for another earthquake. I hate to say it. I wish it wouldn't happen, but look, the seismic activity there has fit a pattern over the centuries. Could the next one be a part of the Gog-Magog war? Yeah, it could, no doubt. Does that mean 4 or 5 years for that war? I don't know. I'm not in the business of predictions. I will never be a date setter. That's foolishness. So I'm not going to do that. I would just say that, yeah, Israel, it wouldn't be a shock to any seismologist or anyone who follows earthquakes if Israel, God forbid, was struck by an earthquake in the coming years. It wouldn't shock anyone. And Israel's preparing for that, especially in the wake of the Turkey quake. They're saying, man, kind of a wake-up call here. And also Gog-Magog. Look, the prophetic chess pieces. Russia is at Israel's doorstep now with Iran. Turkey has been hostile to Israel despite the recent charm offensive. When will it happen? Couldn't tell you. But I can tell you certainly that things are aligning. Could be 20, 30 years. I don't know. Probably not, in my view, but I'm not a date setter, and things are aligning. Let's just say that. Hey, I got to go, folks. Unfortunately, we've been going for an hour now. This has been great. Check out that Amir newscast from yesterday. I think you'll really like it. We've got some good content coming to you from Israel in the coming days and weeks. It's good to be back. No better way to start back up here in the United States than to be with my watchmen and women on the wall for this live stream. So until tomorrow, thanks so much for joining us. God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace.
Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. If you enjoyed this episode and want to see more, make sure you go ahead and hit the like button, click subscribe, and tap the bell icon to turn on notifications for new Watchman Newscast episodes every weekday.